In this video, we are going to talk about doing problems that involve the concept of absolute value. Let's review what absolute value, or sometimes it's called absolute change, means. It's the amount of change in something without a negative sign. In other words, we're not really concerned about the direction. We're just concerned about the amount of the change, and we will treat it as a positive number. So there are absolute value symbols that we will review in a moment. If the result of what's in the absolute value symbols results in a negative, we're just going to ignore that negative sign and treat it as positive. The symbol for absolute value is two vertical lines. They look like this. They act as parentheses, but they have the extra effect of turning the result of whatever is inside positive. So I'm not going to go through all of these examples, but if we look at this as a parenthesis, we're going to do the math inside the two symbols. If it turns out to be a negative number, we will turn it into a positive number and then continue with the math. The rules of working with absolute value symbols. Here's an example right here, 5 minus, and then we have our absolute value symbols, 7 times in parentheses, regular parentheses, 1 minus 2. First, we want to treat the absolute value symbols like parentheses. So we will do everything inside of that first. So let's do that with this little example here. So within our absolute value, we also have parentheses. So we have to do that first. So our first step of simplification might look like this. 5 minus the absolute value of 7 times 1 minus 2 is minus 1. So inside our absolute value, we have 7 times minus 1. So now let's do that multiplication. That gives us 5 minus absolute value of negative 7. Now here's where the absolute value comes into play. This is going to turn this into a positive 7, but we're still subtracting it. So it's going to be 5 minus a positive 7. See how we've dropped the absolute value symbols, and we've turned this 7 into a positive number. This subtraction comes from here. A positive 7 comes from there. And now we just simplify normally. That's going to be the next step. And so the sign of the result of our absolute value was negative 7. We ignored that. We made it positive 7. And then finally, we continue with the rest of the simplification. Normally, that gives us a result of negative 2. 5 minus 7 is negative 2. So the important point about this is just because there's absolute value symbol involved, it doesn't necessarily mean that the ultimate answer will be positive. It's just whatever is in the absolute value symbol will be positive. So just a few examples. We'll run through 6 examples, actually. This is the easiest of those examples. This just tells us to make negative 5 a positive number. The result of that is just going to be the number 5. You can think of it as stripping the negative sign off of that negative 5. Second example. Here we have subtraction going on within our absolute value, so we want to do that first. So our first step is to say 12 minus 20, which is negative 8. And now it's just like the previous problem. We're just stripping off that negative sign. The result of this will just be the number 8. It's a pretty simple concept once you get used to it. Example number 3, we have a little bit more going on here. First, we want to do what's inside of this. So negative 2, and this is multiplication here. We're multiplying negative 2 times what's in the absolute value here. That's going to be the absolute value of minus 3, which is just going to be positive 3. So in this case, we can replace the absolute value symbol with a regular parenthesis after we strip off the negative sign. -2 times +3, our answer is -6. An example again where our ultimate answer was still negative, even though the result of what we did inside the absolute value symbol was positive. Example 4, 5 minus x when x is equal to 18. This is an example where we have a variable in our absolute value. So we just need to substitute and then evaluate normally. So we have absolute value of 5 minus 18. And then we simplify that. We get 5 minus 18 is minus 13. And then we strip off the negative and we're left with just 13. Example 5. Here we have two absolute values. This is starting to get a little bit messy, but we just have to handle them one at a time. So let's do this one first. We'll leave the absolute value until we get all of the math inside simplified. 2 minus 8, -6. The subtraction just follows down. And then we can simplify our other absolute value. 2 minus 5, -3. And now we will drop our absolute value and make this positive. 6 minus +3. Our answer is 6 minus 3, which is the number 3. One more example that's a little bit different. Sometimes absolute value can work its way into word problems. In this case, they give us a little bit of an explanation as to what we're getting into. Absolute error is the absolute value of the difference between the correct value and a measurement. That sounds a little bit confusing until we read the rest of this. A deli scale gives us a measurement of 22.5 ounces for a weight that is known to be exactly 25 ounces. So the 25 ounces is our correct value. We know that the weight should be exactly 25 ounces. The measurement coming off the scale, which isn't necessarily perfect, is 22.5. What is the absolute error in ounces of the deli scale? So up here, it described to us that the absolute error is the absolute value of the difference between these two numbers. Now, one of the things that absolute value allows us to do is to not worry about which way we subtract. So, for instance, we can take 22.5 and subtract 25. Or we could do it the other way, and we could say 25 minus 22.5. Either way is going to give us the same result. Let's see how that works. If we do this subtraction, we're going to get the absolute value of -2.5. If we do it this way, we get the absolute value of +2.5. And in both cases, the answer is 2.5. Because when we take the absolute value of a positive number, it doesn't do anything. We can just rewrite it. It doesn't make it negative. The result of an absolute value will always be a positive number. Well, I hope that helps. Now it's time for some practice on your own.